Mercy had sounded different in the pack hall an hour ago, bright in their mouths, polished for witnesses. In the cellar, it tasted like rust and wet dirt. Rowena Nightshade lay where they had thrown her, cheek against cold stone, one arm curved over the weight of her 8-month belly while footsteps retreated above. Kinship, she realized as the lock turned, was only another oath people kept until fear offered them a cleaner story. The root cellar door slammed above her with a sound that seemed to shake the child inside her. Dust drifted down in thin, pale ribbons. The darkness carried old earth, sour apples, wet stone, and the metallic bite of spilled wine. Her wrists burned where rope had rubbed skin raw when the enforcers dragged her from the pack hall. One of them had laughed when she stumbled on the stairs and caught herself with both hands over her stomach. "Careful with the air," he had said, mockingly tender. "We would not want the traitor's proof damaged before sentencing." Another voice had answered from the doorway, sharp with practiced outrage. "She poisoned the Luna's ceremonial cup. Keep her below until the vows are done." Bastion's voice. Even through pain and panic, she had recognized the cadence that once read stories beside winter fires, the same cousin who had sworn after her mother's funeral that she would never face the world alone. Now he used the formal register of public condemnation, each word clipped and sanctimonious, already arranging witnesses in his head. Rowena pushed herself upright against a stack of potato crates, breath shuddering. 8 months. Her back cramped in pulsing bands that tightened and eased and tightened again. She pressed her palm under her belly and counted slowly, trying to decide whether the hard ripples were fear or labor beginning too soon. Above, muffled by floorboards and stone, drums from the mating ceremony rolled through the fortress in solemn rhythm. They were finishing the life he wanted. She forced herself toward the wall where a slit of moonlight leaked through a cracked vent. Cold air touched her face. She tilted her head to listen. Bootsteps crossed the corridor overhead. Laughter rose, then the chant of ritual vows, voices layered in formal harmony. Her name traveled down once, not as a prayer but as accusation. Rowena Nightshade, false-blooded. Rowena Nightshade, oathbreaker. Rowena Nightshade, vessel of curse. Her throat closed, not from surprise, from recognition. He had prepared them. "I am not crazy. I am not cursed. I did not poison anyone. I am standing in dirt because he planned every step, and I walked where he pointed because he wore my family's face. I can still taste the temple wine from when he asked me to carry the ledger chest, and now they say I touched what I never touched. I can still hear my aunt telling me to keep my head bowed and trust blood to shield me. Blood is what put me in this room. Blood is what made them listen when he lied. My baby is moving, and that means we are still here. We are still here. We are still here." The chant above shifted into applause. A bolt scraped somewhere distant. Rain began, tapping the fortress in uneven patterns that leaked through cracks and made the cellar smell greener, alive with roots and rot. In the torchlit courtyard, Wulfric Valewood stood in the plain leather of a border soldier, scar crossing his jaw, rank hidden beneath mud and an old cloak. He watched Bastion receive congratulations with humble bows too polished to be sincere. The public rite had already veered wrong. The hall smelled of resin, wine, and nervous sweat. Under it all, from between stones near the drainage grates, another scent threaded through like lightning under skin. Rain-soaked lavender, iron, fear, and something older that hit his chest hard enough to steal breath. His pulse kicked once, hard. His wolf surged forward, not with hunger, but with recognition so violent it blurred the crowd at the edges. Ancient bond, unmistakable, beneath the fortress. He turned toward the grate. Bastion stepped into his path with a cup lifted in staged camaraderie. "Stay with us, soldier. The rite needs every blade tonight." Wulfric did not take the cup. "Someone is below." "Storage workers," Bastion said. then softer, a warning hidden under charm. The king expects order. Do not wander where you are not assigned. Wulfric held his gaze one breath too long, cataloging the flicker there. Calculation, then fear, then immediate correction into offended authority. He stepped aside, as if obeying. He did not return to the circle. He started with the east wing, opening each room himself. By the time the third cycle of ceremonial drums rolled over the fortress, Rowena's legs had gone numb from cold stone. She had rubbed ropes against a rusted nail protruding from a crate until the fibers frayed and snapped, leaving angry welts around both wrists. The relief made her dizzy. She flexed her fingers and winced when pins and needles flared. The door opened. Lantern light cut a bright rectangle across the floor. Bastian descended alone, cloak dry despite the rain, boots clean as if he had floated above the mud and old grief. He shut the door behind him and set a folder of folded parchment on a barrel as carefully as a priest placing an offering. "You look awful," he said. Rowena tasted bile. "You framed me." He sighed, patient. "You always choose the dramatic version. I chose survival. There is unrest on 3 borders, the council is weak, and Valewood needs a regent strong enough to hold the throne when fear starts eating judgment. A scandalous cousin carrying nameless blood is useful for one thing only." He slid the top parchment toward her. A confession, already sealed with counterfeit council marks. "Sign, and I can promise you a cleaner death." She stared at him, then at the seal. "You forged temple authority." "I purchased accuracy," he corrected. The scribe liked silver more than scripture. When she did not reach for the page, his expression thinned. "At moonrise, the sentence will be carried out before witnesses. Your child will be cited as evidence of the nightshade defect in next session law. It gives us legal ground to purge rival lines. You should be proud. You will help unify the realm." Rowena laughed once, a raw sound that startled even her. "You buried me and called it governance." His hand closed around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise deeply, hard enough to remind. You were useful only as silence. Pain shot up her arm. The baby kicked, fierce and sudden, and she gasped. Bastian released her as if annoyed by inconvenience. He moved to the stairs, paused, and looked back without warmth. "Do not force my guards to carry you. It spoils the ceremony." The latch dropped. Darkness took the room again. For several breaths, she did nothing but shake. Then the shaking changed shape, not collapse. Direction. If she waited, she died on his schedule, and her child became a legal weapon in his hands. If she moved, she might die in a corridor, in rain, under arrows meant to erase witnesses. The trade-off was cruel and non-trivial. It was still a choice. She chose movement. Rowena dragged the heaviest crate beneath the vent slit and climbed, teeth clenched against another crushing band of pain in her lower back. The vent was too narrow for easy passage, but age had softened mortar at one corner. She drove the heel of her palm into it. Nothing. Again. Dust showered into her eyes. She coughed, spat grit, struck harder. A stone shifted with a dull crack. Above her, footsteps passed and faded. She wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled until skin split at her knuckles. More mortar broke. Cold rain needled through. She widened the opening one stone at a time, breath ragged, belly pressed painfully against rough edges. When the space was barely broad enough, she turned sideways and pushed her shoulders through, then her ribs, then paused, trapped at the hips. Panic came fast and bright. No, not here, not halfway. She exhaled fully, ignored the scrape along her back, and kicked against the crate with both feet. The crate tipped. Her body lurched forward, and suddenly she was out, dropping onto soaked gravel outside the foundation wall, with a grunt that ripped from her chest. Rain drenched her in seconds. It felt like waking. She crawled first, then staggered up, one hand bracing her belly, the other against slick stone as she moved along the shadowed side of the fortress. Torches blurred in the downpour. Music from the ceremony drifted through open windows, cheerful and obscene. Two guards ran past the far corner toward the hall, never turning their heads. Rowena slipped through a service arch and into an abandoned passage lined with broken shields and rain-blackened saints. At the end stood the disused guard chapel, door warped but unbarred. She went inside and shoved it closed behind her, lungs burning. Outside, boots thundered somewhere in the upper corridors, doors opening in quick succession, a man's voice cutting through the storm with controlled command, not shouting, hunting with precision, room by room, closer each minute. The chapel gave her 4 walls and a warped door, but the crux did not soften. Hiding kept her breathing for another minute, while being found by the wrong man ended both her life and her child's future in one clean legal lie. Rowena leaned her weight against the wood, listening. Rain hammered the slate roof in uneven bursts, then slid through cracks to patter onto old pews. The room smelled of candle wax gone stale, wet wool, and stone that had held too many winter prayers. A carved moon emblem had split down the center of the altar years ago, leaving a jagged seam like a healed fracture. She pressed her palm over her lower belly when another tight band gripped her back, waited for it to crest, then counted until it released. Outside, doors banged open in sequence along the corridor, each impact closer than the last. The same controlled male voice she had heard through the storm carried short orders, clipped and calm. Not Bastion's rehearsed outrage, not a guard drunk on borrowed authority. Someone trained to hunt without wasting breath. She moved toward the chapel's side alcove, boots sliding on damp flagstone. A rack of ceremonial spears had long ago rusted into decorative ruin, but one shaft remained sturdy enough to wedge against the door latch. She shoved it into place and nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. One pregnant outcast barricading an old chapel with relic wood, while an entire fortress hunted her name. I am cold and shaking and furious, and none of that matters more than one truth. I am still here. I am still choosing. Every lie he planted depends on me being silent and absent and easy to bury. I can feel my child press against my hand as if he is knocking from inside a locked room, asking if I am coming. I am coming. I am not a vessel for their speeches, not proof for their purge, not a body to wheel onto a dais so men with rings can call murder procedure. If the next door opens and it is Bastion, I bite, claw, scream, run, anything. If it is another enforcer, I run anyway. Fear is loud, but it is not command. Move when it says freeze. Breathe when it says drown. Keep going. A heavy thud struck the chapel door from outside. The spear shuddered in her hands. Another blow. The lower hinge groaned. A third, and the wood split near the latch, opening a narrow, jagged slit to the corridor lantern light. Through it she saw dark leather, rain-beaded boots, and the edge of a cloak dark with weather, any identifying stitch obscured by mud and wear. Her pulse stumbled. The voice outside came low, close to the opening. If there is anyone inside, answer once. I am not with the council guards. Rowena did not speak. Trust had become a luxury with teeth. Silence stretched. Then 2 sets of hurried footsteps approached from farther down the hall, followed by a familiar barked command. She went this way. Break every door. Bastion's enforcers. The man outside shifted position, and she heard steel slide from a sheath. 3 coming from the north corridor, he called over his shoulder. Hold the junction. No killing unless they force it. A second male voice answered, younger, taut with discipline. Understood. Rowena backed away from the door, searching with frantic eyes. The chapel's broken window was too narrow, but behind the altar she found a narrow service passage half hidden by fallen tapestry. It smelled of wet lime and old incense and led into darkness. She turned to it, then froze, when the chapel door cracked inward under one final kick. The spear snapped. The door swung open. He filled the frame, broad-shouldered in plain soldier's leather, rain slicking dark hair back from a scar that cut across his jaw. Lantern light struck the line of his cheekbone, the hard set of his mouth, and the old wolf tattoo winding over his throat. He did not rush her. He looked once at the room, clocked the hidden passage, then lowered his blade tip to the floor as if showing empty hands without ever truly disarming. Behind him, two rain-soaked soldiers in unmarked cloaks locked shields with Bastion's enforcers at the corridor mouth. Steel rang once, then held. No one advanced. "Your wrists," the soldier said quietly, seeing the rope welts. "You were in restraints." Rowena kept one hand over her belly and the other on the altar edge for balance. "Stay back." His nostrils flared as if he caught her scent fully for the first time. The effect was immediate and startling. He took one sharp breath and went absolutely still. The storm seemed to pull away from the room, distant for a single suspended heartbeat. Then warmth struck her chest like a thrown ember catching dry bark. She sucked in air. A bright current raced down her spine and into her limbs. Not pain exactly, not comfort either, but recognition with claws. Her skin prickled from throat to fingertips. The child kicked hard enough to make her fold slightly at the waist with a startled sound she could not hide. The soldier flinched as if he had felt the kick himself. Amber bled into his irises, swallowing brown by degrees until his gaze looked lit from behind by banked fire. The predator surfaced in the shape of his pupils. His jaw clenched once, visibly. Then he sheathed his blade in a single measured motion and dropped to one knee on the wet stone between them. Reverence, not conquest. Rowena stared at him, chest heaving. Heat pulsed beneath her skin in answering waves, each pulse timed to his breathing as though some invisible thread had looped through both their ribs and drawn taut. Attraction was too small a word for it. Terror was still there, old and earned, yet it tangled with an ache so fierce it made her eyes sting. She had spent months being looked at as evidence, burden, accusation. He looked at her as if she were a vow. No. Dangerous, powerful men knelt right before they caged you. Her knees threatened to buckle. She held the altar harder. In the corridor, one of Bastion's enforcers shouted, "By council warrant, surrender the prisoner!" The kneeling soldier never broke eye contact. His voice carried clear and cold. "Bring your warrant to daylight and ink. You are in a restricted ward now. Step back." "Since when does a common soldier invoke ward law?" "Since this moment," he said. The clash at the junction stilled into a breathing standoff. Inside the chapel, the pull between them intensified, not metaphorical, not imagined. Rowena felt it as a physical line from sternum to sternum, warm and unyielding, as if moonlight had weight. Her instincts sharpened to painful clarity. She could hear rainwater dripping from his cloak hem. She could smell cedar, iron, wolf, and the faint smoke of torch oil clinging to his sleeves. She could also smell her own fear, sharp as torn mint. He seemed to register all of it. "Rowena," he said, and her name in his mouth was rough, almost disbelieving, as if spoken after years of silence. "Did he hurt you tonight besides the restraints?" She had not told him her name. Her throat worked once before sound came. "How do you know me?" His expression tightened, not with suspicion, but with the strain of holding himself inside human skin. "I know enough to get you out of this corridor now. You can hate me later if I earn it." The absurdity of that nearly broke her composure. A cracked laugh escaped her, thin and breathless. "You are asking for trust while your eyes look like living embers." A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile despite the tension. "Fair criticism." The child shifted again, a rolling pressure under her palm. The soldier's gaze dropped there for one reverent second, then returned to her face. He did not reach. He did not assume. "May I come closer?" he asked, "or do you want the passage behind you?" Choice. Given, not performed. The corridor erupted in renewed shouting. One enforcer had tried to push through. A shield slammed. Boots scraped. The younger soldier called, "We cannot hold this choke point long." Rowena's options collapsed into seconds. The hidden passage could lead to another trap. Staying meant capture. The kneeling soldier radiated controlled violence and a bond her body already recognized, even while her mind rebelled. None were safe. One felt true. She swallowed against the tremor in her voice. Closer. Slowly. He rose with deliberate care and took one step, then stopped when she tensed. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto his collar. Up close, the scar on his jaw was old, pale, and ragged, the kind earned in real battle, not staged heroics. His scent wrapped around her again, and the warm thread in her chest tightened to near pain. A whisper of memory slid through her, not visual, more like sensation. Moonlit pines, a low male laugh she had never heard, hands stained with earth planting winter wheat beside a fortress wall. Not hers. Not his entirely. Shared, perhaps, by whatever ancient law had just laid claim to both their pulse. She shook her head hard as if to clear water from her ears. "What is happening to me?" His answer came on a rough exhale. "To us." The words landed like truth spoken too early. Another contraction seized her lower back, stronger than the last, and she bent forward with a gasp. He moved instinctively, then halted half an inch from touching her, as if held by his own discipline. "Tell me where," he said. "I will not touch you without permission." "Lower back," she forced out. "May I?" She nodded, barely. His hands were large and calloused, warm through soaked fabric, pressure firm but careful at the exact points where pain gripped hardest. He counted with her under his breath, each number steady as a drumbeat, and by 8, the worst of the spasm eased. She realized she was matching him instinctively, drawing air when he did, releasing when he did, the thread between them sinking heartbeats into one relentless cadence. At the corridor mouth, the enforcers finally retreated a pace under shield pressure. "This is not finished," one spat. "No," the soldier said without looking away from Rowena. "It is beginning." He turned his head slightly toward the men at the door. "Keep this hall closed. No one enters without my word." Then, to Rowena, quieter, the ember light still alive in his eyes. "You are under my protection now. Not as property. Not as leverage. As mine to safeguard if you allow it." The declaration should have sent her running. Instead, it settled in the exact hollow fear had carved for months and met it with heat. She held his gaze, breath unsteady, and felt the bond lock fully into place like a key turning in an ancient gate. The sensation of that invisible lock settling between them did not erase the corridor, the rain, or the men who wanted her chained, but it redrew the edges of each threat. Rowena felt it in the way she could finally inhale without drowning. He stepped back first, as if to prove he meant what he had said about choice. "Name," he called to the younger soldier at the junction. "Taryn." "Taryn, rotate with Edric every 20 counts. No heroics. Hold ground." A short nod answered him. The enforcers cursed under their breath and retreated another step, unwilling to rush a choke point they could not break quickly. Then he turned back to her, voice lower. "Can you walk if I keep the weight off your right side?" She nodded. He did not reach until she tilted toward him. His forearm formed a steady bar just beneath her elbow, careful not to trap. He guided her behind the split altar into a narrow vestry room with one cracked basin, a rusted brazier, and a small window where rain threaded through broken glass. The space was hardly safer than the chapel, yet it was hidden from direct view and easier to defend. He shut the door with his heel and crouched by the brazier. A sparkstone clicked. On the third strike, tinder caught and a small orange flame climbed the kindling. Heat spread slowly, barely enough to warm stone, but enough to take the knife edge from the air. Rowena stayed standing until dizziness forced her onto a low bench. Her wrists throbbed in sharp pulses where the rope had peeled skin. Mud streaked her skirt to the knee. She watched him remove his gloves, fill a metal cup from a rain barrel tucked under the window, and set it near the brazier to warm. A man with his strength could have filled the room with commands. He moved like a caretaker in a temple, each motion deliberate, no wasted noise. "You keep waiting for the demand," he said, not looking up. Her laugh came brittle. "Because there is always one." The cup steamed faintly. He tore a clean strip from the inner hem of his own undershirt and tested the water against his wrist. "May I clean those?" She stared at him. "You are asking again." "I will keep asking." She extended her hands. When the wet cloth touched her skin, she flinched. He paused instantly. "Too hot." "No, just—" She swallowed. "No one has done anything gently in a long time." His jaw tightened as if he had bitten down on anger meant for someone else. "Then we start there." He cleaned away grit and dried blood in patient strokes, changing the cloth when it darkened. He did not lecture. He did not ask how she had been trapped, who had touched her, or which version of the accusations was true. The silence held room for breath rather than suspicion. When he finished one wrist, he wrapped it with the torn linen, not too tight, and moved to the other. The child shifted hard under her palm. A ripple crossed the curve of her belly. He looked up, and a different expression crossed his face, unguarded and almost awed. He set the cloth aside, then did something so unexpected she forgot to brace. He lowered to one knee in front of her and addressed her unborn child before speaking to her. "Little warrior," he said quietly, his hand hovering an inch above her belly until Rowena gave a small nod. "You have terrible timing and impeccable instincts. Keep kicking if she needs me to stop talking." The baby answered with a firm bump against her skin. A rough smile touched his mouth. "Understood." Only then did he lift his gaze to her. "Rowena, pain again?" "Yes." "Back or lower?" "Both." "May I?" She nodded once. He moved behind her, palms broad and warm through damp fabric, finding the tight bands of muscle along her lower spine with unnerving accuracy. He counted softly while she breathed through the crest of each contraction like wave, numbers steady as carved stone. 1, 2, 3. By 10, the worst had eased. She leaned back against the wall and shut her eyes. The brazier crackled. Rain tapped the broken glass in thin metallic beats. From the chapel beyond, Taryn's boots scraped twice, a reassuring pattern that marked the guard change. "I do not understand this. I am trained for contempt, for bargains dressed as mercy, for men who call protection a debt that must be repaid with obedience." He had every opening: a locked room, a frightened woman, a bond hot as iron in my chest that makes my pulse answer his without permission. He could have taken control and called it fate. Instead, he asks where to place his hands, whether I can walk, whether pain is too sharp. I keep waiting for the mask to drop and the hunger to show. It does not. I keep waiting for my body to remember only fear when he comes close, and yet, there is this other current, fierce and calm at once, that says rest for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 5. I do not trust easily. I may never trust easily again. But my guard is no longer a wall. It has become a door, and tonight, he has not forced it. He rose and scanned the room. On a peg near the vestry door hung one dry guard cloak, forgotten by some long-dead sentry. He took it down and held it out. "You wear it," she said automatically. His hair still dripped. Rain had darkened his collar to the bone. You need heat more. And you. I have had colder watches. She took the cloak. It smelled faintly of cedar and old wool. When she settled it over her shoulders, warmth pooled at her throat like relief she did not want to name. A thin smile ghosted across her face despite herself. The Alpha King soldier has the bedside manners of an anxious midwife. His answering look held the first real humor she had seen on him, brief and almost disbelieving. I survived 3 border campaigns. A furious mother remains my most dangerous posting. The sound that left her this time was a real laugh, small but alive. It surprised them both. He moved to the broken window, where rain slid through the cracked pane and needled his sleeve. From there he could see the corridor approach, and the courtyard angle below. He planted his feet and kept watch, a dark, silent barrier between her and every doorway. Hours stretched and folded. He did not sleep. Twice he changed the brazier fuel. 3 times he asked if her pain had shifted and waited for answer. Each time she drifted toward panic, he counted with her until her breathing steadied again. By the hour before dawn, the storm had thinned to mist and the drums in the pack hall had gone silent. The next escalation came with iron on stone. A squad of enforcers marched into the corridor in polished breastplates. Unlike the earlier hunters, these bearing formal insignia and a rolled parchment sealed in council wax. Their captain, a narrow man with a scar split through one eyebrow, stopped at the chapel threshold and looked past the guards, as though Rowena were freight to be inventoried. "Prisoner transfer?" he announced, "by authority of emergency decree." The man at the window did not turn. "State your decree for the record." The captain snapped the parchment open. "Rowena Nightshade is declared forfeited property pending judgment for treasonous contamination of a ceremonial rite and unlawful conception under disputed bloodline. She is to be returned for immediate custody." Property. The word hit her harder than the cellar lock had. Taryn shifted, disgust plain in his posture, but held line. The captain gestured to 2 men carrying iron shackles and a handling whip, leather dark with rain. "Secure her and move." "Stop," the soldier at the window said, still quiet. The captain sneered. "You will not obstruct council action for a disgraced female." The next seconds moved with the precision of practiced violence and the restraint of a man forcing himself not to break everything in reach. One handler stepped forward, chain lifted. The soldier crossed the room in 2 strides and put his body between Iron and Rowena. The whip cracked immediately, aimed past him for her wrists. He turned just enough to shield her and took the strike across his own shoulder. The sound snapped through the vestry like split timber. He did not flinch away. He did not strike back. His voice dropped colder than winter water. Under Sanctuary Statute 9, witness line and unborn life take precedence over discretionary seizure. This chapel is registered ward ground under pre-Crown Compact. Touch her again inside this threshold, and your warrants become self-incriminating evidence. The captain barked a laugh that did not quite hide unease. A common soldier quoting pre-Crown law. "Read the lower seal," he said. The captain frowned and looked down. Whatever mark he found there blanched him by a shade. Not recognition of full identity, perhaps, but enough authority to make the room tilt. "She is accused of poisoning," he tried again, weaker now. "Council can compel." "Council can petition at first light before assembled witnesses," the soldier replied. "Until then, she remains under sanctuary and my protection." A long, taut beat passed. The handlers lowered the chain a fraction. The captain rolled the parchment with sharp, angry movements. "You are delaying justice." "No," he said. "I am preventing theft dressed as process." He held the captain's gaze until the man stepped back first. "Withdraw!" The captain snapped to his squad. "For now." Boots receded down the corridor, metallic and resentful, then faded into the waking fortress. Only when they were gone did Rowena realize her nails had dug crescents into her palms. The line of red on his shoulder had already darkened his leather where the whip struck. Not deep, but enough to sting. She rose too quickly, swayed, and caught herself on the bench. "You took that for me." I took a line that was meant to become a pattern. He peeled the torn leather at his shoulder and checked the welt with the detached assessment of someone accustomed to injury. One strike is cheaper than letting them brand your skin as procedure. Her throat burned. "You could have killed them." "Yes." The single word carried no boast, only fact. "Why didn't you?" His gaze settled on her with that same unwavering intensity that had found her in the chapel. "Because dead men become martyr stories in corrupt mouths. You deserve better than another hidden rescue and another rumor. You deserve truth in daylight where they cannot bury it." The weight of that settled slowly, then all at once. Protection not as ownership, not as a cage with softer walls. Strategy built around her dignity, even when it cost him pain and patience. She stepped closer, stopping an arm's length away. "Who are you?" A pause. Then carefully. "The man who will stand beside you when you speak. The rest can wait one more hour." It should have frustrated her. Instead, she heard the promise beneath it and understood he was giving her what control he could in a night built from theft. She reached up, hesitated, and at last touched the uninjured side of his jaw, fingers light against rain-cold skin. He went still, not from dominance this time, but from restraint so complete it felt like reverence. "Then stay," she whispered. "I am not leaving." For the first time since the cellar door had slammed, Rowena believed him. A hard rap sounded at the vestry door. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Wulfric moved first, blade half drawn, then eased when Taryn's voice came through the wood. "Report. Urgent. Enter." Taryn slipped inside, rain-dark curls plastered to his forehead, one glove missing, and knuckles split. He carried a leather courier satchel with a broken strap and set it on the bench between them. Intercepted in the south passage. Runner heading for the western stables. He drew steel when challenged. Wulfric opened the satchel and removed a packet of folded documents bound with blue temple cord and sealed in red wax stamped with the council crest. The impression was slightly off-center. Rowena leaned forward without meaning to. Bastian always pressed seals too hard on the left side. Even in forgery, his habits survived. Wulfric broke the wax and scanned the first page. The muscles in his jaw locked. He handed it to her. Rowena read her own death written in formal language that tried to sound righteous. Immediate moonrise sentence for contamination of a sacred rite. Posthumous classification of unborn issue as evidence of hereditary corruption under emergency blood safety provisions. She read the next page and felt her stomach drop colder than the rain had left it. A regency petition drafted in Bastian's name, citing regional unrest and potential royal incapacitation, recommending temporary centralized command over Valewood territories and adjacent pacts until the throne stabilizes. The third paper was a list of payments in coded initials. One entry was not coded. Temple scribe Ivan, silver weight received. Another line read, West Parapet. 1 archer. Accidental resolution if scarred border soldier interferes. The room narrowed to the scrape of her breathing. Wulfric read over her shoulder, voice low and lethal. He planned to erase you, weaponize your child, and step into the crown through procedural panic. Taryn added, "The runner also carried route sketches for guard rotations tonight. He marked your chapel and 2 fallback corridors. They are not searching anymore. They are positioning." Rowena lowered the page carefully because her hands had started to shake again. "He does not want me recaptured. He wants me dead in a lawful costume." Wulfric's gaze met hers, amber still threaded through his irises. "Yes." She looked down at the Regency petition one more time. Bastian had drafted 3 versions, each with slightly different wording for different councils. He had planned for resistance, then planned around that resistance, then planned around grief. The threat had never been one cruel cousin with ambition. It was architecture, forged ledgers, purchased testimony, emergency statutes twisted into a framework where murder became governance. Taryn shifted his weight. There is more. I heard two quartermasters talking near the lower armory. Bastion moved crossbow teams to the inner balconies above the moon dais, claimed it was ceremonial security. Security for whom? Rowena said, though she already knew. Wulfric refolded the documents with precise calm and handed them back to her. Keep these on your body. If I am separated from you, evidence survives. The instruction landed with brutal clarity. If I am separated from you. He turned to Taryn. Get Edric, quietly. Hold the north transept and post no one where a balcony line can trap you. If challenged, cite Sanctuary Compact and stall. Taryn hesitated. If they force entry. Wulfric's voice dropped another degree. Then you buy us minutes and nothing heroic. Go. When the door shut behind Taryn, silence filled the room, dense and intimate. Rowena could hear the tiny hiss of rain on the brazier stones. She tucked the folded papers inside the inner seam of the dry cloak and pressed her palm there as if she could keep truth from being stolen by touch. Wulfric stood near enough that she felt his body heat through wool and damp air. I should have revealed myself earlier. Would it have changed his plan? It would have changed your risk. She studied him, scarred jaw, controlled breath, shoulder welt already swelling under torn leather. You knew he was targeting you too. I knew someone was. I did not know it was your blood. The statement should have driven a wedge between them, another reminder that power moved around her life without permission. Instead, she heard the underlying fracture in him. Fury at himself for missing a pattern, for arriving room by room while she was already in chains. She stood in a borrowed cloak with forged warrants hidden against her ribs, and a man who could command armies, asking, with his whole body, whether he had the right to stand this close. Fear told her to run from anything that's strong. Instinct told her to lean closer, not because she was weak, but because he had never used strength to make her smaller. She had lived too long inside accusations to mistake restraint for softness. This was not softness. It was discipline forged in fire and offered like shelter. She did not yet know how to trust without flinching. She trusted in fragments now, permissions asked, doors held open, choices returned. Fragment by fragment was still trust. Her gaze dropped to the torn leather on his shoulder. Sit. He blinked once, surprised by the command, then obeyed without comment. She soaked the cloth again and cleaned the whip line while he held still. Up close, his scent was cedar, rain, and the wild undertone that made the bond hum in her bones. When she tied a fresh strip of linen over the welt, her fingers brushed the side of his neck where the old wolf tattoo curved under his collar. "Who are you?" she asked again, quieter this time, less demand than threshold. He exhaled slowly. Wulfric Valewood. The name struck like a bell. Not the title spoken in fear by border scouts, not the distant king wrapped in legend. This man, kneeling in a cracked vestry while dawn lifted gray across broken glass. Rowena sat back on her heels. The Alpha King. In poor disguise, apparently. Despite everything, a startled breath of humor escaped her. I have seen better. A fleeting smile answered, then faded into sober intent. If I announce it now in a closed room, Bastion claims coercion or impersonation. He built this to survive whispers. We break it in front of witnesses or it regrows. By mid-morning, the rain had thinned to a cold mist that turned the courtyard flagstones silver. From the chapel corridor came the echo of moving boots. More than before, paced and organized. Not frantic hunters now, units taking assigned positions. Edric arrived with Tareen and a rolled sanctuary ledger recovered from the chapel archive. the parchment edges brittle with age. Entry confirms this ward remains protected under pre-Crown Compact, Edric said. Unless revoked by royal hand in person. Wulfric nodded once. Good. Keep it visible. A horn sounded outside, long and formal. Then another. The summons for public assembly. A herald's voice rose in the courtyard, amplified by stone. By emergency order of acting council authority, all ranking pack members to the moon, dais at sundown. Proceedings to include judgment of Rowena Nightshade, affirmation of ceremonial succession, and interim security stewardship. Rowena closed her eyes briefly. He moved the ceremony into a tribunal. He merged them, Wulfric said, so dissent looks like treason. Taryn looked between them. We can still move her out through the old granary tunnel, reach the river by noon. Rowena pictured mud banks, open ground, archers on walls, and Bastion reading her absence as guilt to a full pack by dusk. Another hidden escape, another story told for her. No, she said. Wulfric turned, searching her face to make sure he heard correctly. She met his gaze and felt the bond answer, a low thrum building in her chest. If I disappear, he wins twice. He keeps power and writes my child into law as a curse. I am done being the missing witness. Edric swore under his breath, not in protest, in grim respect. Wulfric stepped closer. If you walk into that circle, he will try to break process and force immediate sentence. Then we force older law. His expression sharpened. Right of blood testimony. She nodded. I can invoke it. He is my blood. He cannot dismiss me without exposing his fear. The plan settled among them, dangerous and coherent. Present evidence publicly. Demand Moonstone memory echo on handling records. Compel witnesses before sentence. Wulfric would remain in soldier guise until accusation was formally accepted, then reveal identity under royal law to seal jurisdiction. Every step carried trade-offs. Any stumble gave Bastion space to claim procedural contamination. The framework had to be exact. Another horn blast cut through the air, shorter, urgent. Boots pounded closer in the corridor. Edric cracked the vestry door, then snapped it shut again. Strike team, 12 at least. Council insignia and inner guard, mixed. Wulfric drew steel fully this time. Positions. The first impact hit the chapel doors like a battering ram. Wood boomed. Dust shook from rafters. Taryn and Edric locked shields at the inner threshold while Wulfric placed Rowena behind the altar line, where stone offered partial cover. Stay low, he said. You stay alive, she answered. The second ram strike split the outer panel. Voices shouted legal commands over each other. Council authority, seizure protocol, surrender terms that changed mid-sentence because none of it was real law anymore, only volume and momentum. Then a new sound sliced the chaos, the high twang of a balcony crossbow. Wulfric moved so fast she saw only the afterimage of motion. The bolt smashed into the stone pillar where his chest had been an instant earlier and showered shards across the altar. Not warning fire. Quing kill shot. West parapet archer, Rowena said breathless. From the note. A second bolt punched through the broken window and buried itself in the vestry bench, inches from the satchel Taryn had dropped. The team outside the door pressed harder, synchronized now with the shooters above. Bastion had stopped pretending she was being recovered. This was execution under noise cover. Back passage, Edric shouted. Now! Wulfric grabbed the sanctuary ledger with one hand and Rowena's wrist with the other, not dragging, guiding at a dead run through the hidden service corridor behind the torn tapestry. Taryn followed, then Edric, who slammed a rusted gate behind them just as the chapel doors finally gave way with a splintering crash. The passage pitched downward, narrow and damp, lit only by slit windows near the ceiling. Rowena's breath came hard. Pain banded her lower back again, stronger than before. But she kept moving, cloak clenched at her throat with the forged documents pressed beneath. Behind them, pursuit entered the corridor. Boots on stone. 2 teams. Ahead, the passage forked at a collapsed arch. Edric pointed left. Archive stairs to the east transept. A third crossbow bolt ricocheted off the fork wall from somewhere above. Impossible angle unless another unit had already circled ahead. They boxed us, Taryn said. Wulfric scanned once, instantly recalculating routes, distances, lines of fire. No tunnel. We go up. That is toward the inner court, Edric warned. Yes. They took the stair at speed, emerging into a half-roofed gallery overlooking the moon dais courtyard. Torches were already being lit for evening proceedings, though the day had not yet turned. On the far side, Bastion stood under a canopy with 3 council elders, directing formations with crisp hand signals. At his gesture, guards sealed the lower gates and rolled iron bars into place. The pack members gathering in ones and twos looked confused, then anxious, then obedient as enforcers guided them into assigned ranks. Bastion lifted his head as if sensing her, and his gaze found the gallery. Even at distance she read the satisfaction in his face. He raised one hand. Archers on both flanks knocked in unison and aimed at the gallery rail where she stood exposed, the full trap finally visible. Wulfric stepped in front of her, blade up, body a shield. Taryn and Edric spread wide, outnumbered and outpositioned. Below, Bastion's voice rang clear across the stone. "Bring me my cousin alive if possible, dead if necessary. The king's dog dies first." The first volley rose. The first volley hissed through rain and torch smoke, a black arc dropping toward the gallery rail. Wulfric's blade snapped up, steel ringing as 2 bolts glanced away. Taryn slammed his shield over Rowena's head for the next impact, wood thudding hard enough to drive him back a step. Edric caught her elbow and hauled her behind a stone buttress as splinters burst across the floor. Below, pack members screamed and scattered, then froze when enforcers roared conflicting orders. Some crouched behind benches. Some stood rooted by protocol, torn between fear and obedience. Bastion remained under the canopy, one hand lifted in command, face composed as if this were still ceremony. "Down the inner stair," Edric barked. Rowena looked at the stairwell, then at the moon dais in the center court, where the sacred stone rose under rain like a dark tooth of the earth. If they vanished into tunnels now, Bastion would call it admission. He would seal the narrative by sundown. She felt the folded documents against her ribs, damp with her body heat, and understood with painful clarity that survival alone no longer solved anything. Truth had to be witnessed. Another volley rose. She grabbed Wulfric's forearm, forcing his attention to her even as he tracked incoming fire. Not the tunnels. His expression flashed disbelief, then fierce understanding. "Rowena, this angle is a kill box." "Then we change the angle. Take me to the dais." Taryn stared at her as if she had spoken in thunder. "That is open ground." "That is law," she said. "He cannot bury what the whole pack sees." Wulfric held her gaze through one breath that seemed to pull the storm taut. Then he nodded once. Decision made. "Shield wedge," he ordered. 3 steps. Halt. 3 steps. We do not break formation. By the time the third horn faded across the fortress, they were moving. Taryn and Edric locked shields in front, Wulfric covering the right flank with his sword, while Rowena stayed between them, one hand on her belly, one fist clamped around the cloak seam where the papers hid. Bolts hammered the shields and shattered on stone. A squad rushed from the transept to cut them off. Wulfric met the first attacker with a flat-edged strike that sent the man sprawling without a lethal blow, then pivoted and drove another back with sheer force. The wedge kept advancing, step by grinding step, down the stair and into the courtyard. Rain slicked the flags. Torches spat and guttered. Pack elders shouted for order and were ignored until Rowena tore her hood back and lifted her voice from the center of the chaos. I invoke the right of blood testimony. The words cracked across the court sharper than any horn. Even the archers hesitated. The old law was older than Valewood itself. A blood relative under formal accusation could demand open hearing at the Moonstone before sentence. To deny it publicly was to confess fear of evidence. Bastian recovered first. "She is unstable," he called. "Remove her." Rowena stepped onto the first dais stair, rain running from her hair into her eyes. "I name Bastian Valewood, my blood kin, as architect of false charges, forged warrants, and ritual contamination. I demand moon witness under covenant law." Murmurs spread through the gathered pack, disbelief colliding with recognition as people tracked the legal form in her phrasing. Elder Malin, gray-braided and rigid with outrage, pushed forward beneath the canopy. "If she speaks formula correctly, process compels." Bastian's mask thinned. "Process compels only if the council validates competence." Rowena yanked the courier packet from inside her cloak and flung it onto the whetstone between them. Wax seals split on impact. Pages fanned wide, ink visible even in low light. Regency petition, payment ledger, Archer notation. Gasps moved through the ranks like wind through dry leaves. "The competence you purchased from Temple Scribe Ivan is written there," she said. "Your silver ledger is written there. Your order to lock me below is written there." Bastian's jaw hardened. "Forgery. Then let the Moonstone decide whose hands touched it last." She climbed the remaining steps and stood at the altar. Her legs shook, her back clenched with another punishing band of pain, but she did not bend. Wulfric took position one pace behind her left shoulder, a silent wall that did not crowd her voice. "I am standing in the center of the place he built to erase me. I am shaking and I am still upright. Every stare wants to turn me into symbol, curse, caution, spectacle. I refuse all of it. I am a woman with a name, and my name is not evidence for someone else's throne." I feel the child shift, steady and insistent, and that steadiness becomes mine. Fear says, keep small, keep quiet, survive in corners. Truth says, widen your stance and speak so the stones remember. If I fall silent now, he writes law with my absence. If I speak, I may lose everything except myself. I choose myself. I choose the future where my child learns that blood is not permission to harm. I choose the hand that shields. She reached for the ritual blade resting in its cradle and looked to Elder Malin. "Witness." Malin swallowed, then nodded. "Witnessed." Rowena drew the blade across her palm, shallow and clean, and pressed her hand to the moonstone. Rain hissed against the altar as the runes woke, first dim silver, then blazing white along carved channels that had slept for generations. Light surged up her arm. The courtyard darkened at the edges. Images erupted above the stone in rippling echoes. Bastian at a desk in the records chamber, pressing counterfeit seals. Bastian tipping powder into a ceremonial cup. Bastian in the cellar doorway, cold and precise, ordering guards to keep her below until vows concluded. The pack saw all of it. No one spoke. Then someone near the front dropped to their knees. Bastian lunged for the altar with a strangled curse, hand outstretched for her throat. Rowena did not retreat. The dormant force everyone had called a defect tore free under her skin, bright as moonfire. Silver command light burst from her marked palm, lashing forward invisible bands that wrapped his wrists mid-stride and jerked him to a halt. He hit the stones on one knee, bound in radiant chains that tightened when he struggled. Shock ripped through the court. Rowena's voice came low and steady despite the tremor in her body. "Nightshade gift, not curse. Command." Wulfric stepped onto the dais beside her and finally shed concealment, tearing the plain soldier clasp from his cloak to reveal the royal sigil burned into the leather beneath. His aura rolled out in a wave of raw authority that bent the crowd instinctively. Amber bled fierce through his irises, ancient and unmistakable. I am Wulfric Valewood, he said, the words carrying to every wall. Alpha King by blood and oath, I accept Rowena Nightshade's accusation under royal law. Bastion went very still in the chains, then laughed once, ragged and bitter. You hide among foot soldiers and call that kingship. I walked my own halls to see which doors were locked from fear, Wulfric replied. Tonight I found yours. Protocol snapped into place around the revelation. Elder Malin lifted her staff. Accusation accepted. Sanctioned duel at Circle Edge for final judgment of blood right and succession claim. Guards dragged a chalk boundary in the rain around the outer ring of the dais. The silver chains loosened just enough for combat by rule, then dissolved at Rowena's gesture. Bastion surged upright, drawing a slender dueling sword from his belt. Wulfric took a practice blade from the ceremonial rack, deliberately choosing the blunted court steel instead of his war sword. He was not here to butcher, he was here to finish this in law. They circled once on wet stone. Bastion struck first, fast and technical, aiming for the shoulder wound from the whip line. Wulfric parried, footwork economical, forcing Bastion wider with each exchange. Steel clashed, sparks brief in the rain. Bastion fought like a man who had spent years practicing for appearances. Wulfric fought like someone who had survived real winters with enemies at his back. On the fourth pass, Wulfric bound Bastion's blade, twisted, and sent it skittering across the circle. Bastion drove in with a hidden dagger from his sleeve. Wulfric caught his wrist, pivoted, and slammed him to the ground inside the boundary. The dagger spun away. Wulfric put a knee between Bastion's shoulder blades and pinned his arm. Confessed to forged evidence, attempted unlawful execution, and conspiracy against crown authority. Bastion spat rainwater and fury. Family is ownership. She was useful only as silence. Rowena stepped to the circle edge, voice cutting clean through the court. Family is the hand that shields, not the hand that buries. Bastion twisted under Wulfric's hold, found no leverage, and finally went slack. Yes, he ground out. I forged. I paid. I ordered the cellar. I ordered the archers. The confession landed like a verdict bell. Elder Malin raised her staff again. Recorded before Moon Witness and Pack Assembly. Wulfric rose, dragging Bastion to his knees by the collar. Bastion Valewood, by confession and witnessed memory, I strip you of blood right, rank, and claim. Sentence: permanent exile beyond the iron boundary at first light. Your name is erased from Valewood succession. 2 royal wardens stepped forward to take custody. Bastion looked up at Rowena one last time, hatred and disbelief warring in his face, as if he still expected her to fold. She held his gaze without blinking. He was hauled away through the parted crowd, no banners, no allies, no voice left that carried weight. Rain softened to mist over the moon dais. Around Rowena, the pack remained kneeling, not from terror now, but from the stunned gravity of truth made public and law restored in open sight. Rain softened to a fine silver veil, and in that hush, Elder Malin stepped onto the dais, staff braced in both hands, voice carrying with ceremonial gravity. Judgment is rendered, blood right is restored. By covenant, the wronged may choose whether to stand unclaimed or to accept lawful bond before this witness circle. The question settled over Rowena like a second storm, quieter and far more dangerous, because this one demanded not survival, but trust. Her palm still stung from the cut on the moonstone. Her back ached in slow waves. The child shifted low and heavy, reminding her that every choice from this point forward would shape more than her own life. Wulfric did not touch her. He stood one pace away, rain tracing the scar along his jaw, royal sigil visible on his chest, all that power held on a leash so fine it looked like stillness. Rowena, he said, and only her name, no command folded inside it. She searched his face for hunger dressed as devotion. Found none. found strain, restraint, fear of frightening her, and a love so new it was almost raw. Around them, the full pack watched with held breath. I could say no. I could walk down these steps and no one could call me coward now. He would let me go, and that is why I can stay. I have spent months being handled, moved, sentenced, defined. If this bond is real, then it begins where my will is untouched. My body remembers ropes and locks. It also remembers his hands asking permission, his shoulder taking the strike, his voice counting me through pain when I was shaking too hard to stand. I am done confusing possession with protection. I choose the man who knelt in wet stone and waited for my answer. She reached up and untied the ruined collar ribbon at her throat. Then she turned slightly, baring the junction of neck and shoulder beneath rain-damp hair, and held his gaze as she spoke clearly enough for the circle to hear. No more cages. A tremor crossed Wulfric's mouth, gone in an instant. He stepped closer, stopping within her breath. No more hiding, he answered. His hand rose slowly, giving her every heartbeat to refuse, and settled at the back of her neck, warm, steady, reverent. Rowena Nightshade, will you have me as mate before law and moon? Yes. Will you keep your own name and stand beside me, never beneath me? Yes. Only then did he bend. His lips brushed her skin first, a warning and a vow in the same breath. The bite came deep and deliberate at the shoulder's curve, sharp pain flashing bright enough to pull a gasp from her chest. She gripped his forearm, not to push him away, but to stay anchored as heat tore through the wound and raced down her spine in molten currents. The pain transformed almost immediately, opening into fierce warmth that flooded ribs, throat, belly, every place fear had nested for months. Golden light burst beneath her skin where his mark sealed. Silver answered from her bloodline gift, rising to meet it. The two currents braided, not one consuming the other, but weaving into a living strand that snapped tight between their hearts. She felt him as clearly as pulse, his controlled rage, his long loneliness, his relief so profound it nearly dropped him to his knees again. He made a low, broken sound against her shoulder and drew back, eyes bright with something ancient and unbearably tender. Mine, he whispered, not as ownership, but as recognition freely given. She touched the fresh mark at her neck, then slid her hand to his jaw and guided him lower. Yours, she whispered back, and turned him enough to bear the line where neck met shoulder through torn leather and wet shirt. His breath caught. Rowena, you do not owe— I know exactly what I am doing. She sank her teeth into his shoulder, firm and sure, feeling muscle tense under her hands. His answering exhale shook through both of them. A flare of silver shot from her mark into his, and amber surged back, meeting in a burst of light that spilled across the dais and made the runes along the moonstone blaze anew. The bond completed with a palpable drop, like a lock releasing and a gate opening at once. Their heartbeats, frantic and separate for so long, settled into one shared rhythm. Mate, he breathed against her temple. Mate, she echoed. The child kicked hard between them, and both of them laughed through tears they did not bother to hide. Wulfric wrapped his arms around her, careful of her belly, forehead resting against hers while the pack remained kneeling. No chant started. No elder filled the moment with speeches. The only sound was rain on stone and two people holding each other as if the world had finally stopped trying to tear them apart. By first light, the eastern sky had gone pearl gray over the iron boundary road. Rowena stood beside Wulfric at the fortress gate as wardens escorted Bastion beyond the marked line, wrists bound in plain rope, no crest on his cloak, no one speaking his name. Elder Malin read the exile decree aloud, then burned the succession roll bearing his claim in a brazier set at the threshold. Ash lifted into dawn wind and vanished over the ravine. Bastion looked back once, eyes flat with disbelief, and kept walking when the wardens pointed north. From the gate, they moved directly to the Great Hall Tribunal. No delay. No private revisions. The courier packet Terrin had seized was placed on the central table, each page dried, catalogued, and copied in front of witnesses from 5 packs. Edric set the sanctuary ledger beside it, open to the pre-crown compact entry, and Malin sealed both into the royal archive chest with fresh wax under Rowena's watch. The off-center counterfeit seals were compared against Bastion's private signet and entered as corroborating detail. Temple scribe Ivan, pale and shaking, confessed to taking silver for forged validation. The court stripped his office and sentenced him to supervised labor in the river granaries for 10 years, barred from all record halls. The captain who had brought the property warrant stood to testify next. He admitted he had recognized the lower ward seal and withdrew because he understood the seizure order was unlawful inside sanctuary ground. His statement closed the gap Bastion had tried to leave between forged process and attempted killing. No thread remained loose enough to pull the case apart. At midday, with the court still assembled, Wulfric rose but did not take the high throne. He remained on the floor beside Rowena and read the first reform statute himself before handing it to her for final wording. Sanctuary protection was expanded to include abandoned mothers and unborn heirs under disputed claim. False accusation in ceremonial matters became a major offense with mandatory public review. Emergency decrees could no longer classify a person as property under any circumstance. Rowena pressed her marked hand to the decree stone and spoke the ratification. The hall answered with bowed heads, not fear-driven, but willing. 3 days later, moonlight washed the temple court in clean white. Rowena stood at the central basin in a dark wool gown, Wulfric at her left, Taran and Edric on either side in formal guard cloaks newly clasped with royal pins. Malin lifted blessed water and touched Rowena's brow, then the curve of her belly. Air of nightshade resilience and veilwood strength, she intoned. The child rolled under Rowena's palm as if answering his own name to come, and quiet laughter moved through the gathered pack. When the blessing ended, Wulfric offered his arm. She took it. Not because she needed help walking, but because she liked the feel of him there. At dusk they stepped onto the fortress balcony where she had once listened for doors that might open into harm. Below, the courtyard filled in ordered ranks. Wolves and humans alike knelt, then lifted their heads when she touched the mark at her throat and raised her free hand in acknowledgement. Her other hand rested on her rounded belly. No one shouted her titles for spectacle. They spoke them once, clear and unified. Luna Queen Rowena, Alpha King Wulfric. She turned toward him. Amber light lived softly in his gaze now, no longer a warning, simply home. He bent, kissed her forehead, then her marked shoulder with quiet reverence. The future did not look easy. It looked shared, lawful, and fiercely loved, and for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough.